We turn now to the man trying to lead his party to victory this November, House Republican Leader John Boehner of Ohio. He joins us this morning from Cincinnati. Leader Boehner, welcome back to us.
David, good morning.
I want to continue on the Gulf Coast bill as we near completion of this, and you heard Carol Browner's comments. I want to pick up on holding BP accountable. Do you think the government should pursue negligence claims against BP?
I think the government should do everything they possibly can to bring this crisis to an end. And that means going after BP, enforcing the laws that are on the books, and restoring the Gulf to its original condition. I think BP has stepped forward in terms of the money that they've put forward so far, but there is the law, and they should be held accountable.
The question, however, also extends to, in terms of revitalizing the Gulf Coast, this issue of the moratorium on deep water drilling. You heard Carol Browner concede the White House didn't do an economic analysis into the industries along the Gulf Coast. Should that moratorium be lifted by this point?
I believe the moratorium should be lifted. We've been drilling in the Gulf Coast now for 60 years. There are 40,000 wells operating in the Gulf Coast. There's clearly was a mistake made with regard to this one well. But I think that we're risking 100,000 jobs in the Gulf Coast with the continuation of this moratorium. And I do believe that, that there are enough practices in place, enough safety precautions in place to allow this drilling to continue, because if we're serious about moving toward energy independence, we need to do all of the above. Which includes exploration for more oil and gas in the United States of America.
There seems to be some bipartisan agreement about this point when it comes to the Gulf oil spill and in terms of the permits being issued. There was a failure of regulation. When it comes to the Wall Street collapse, the financial system collapse, a failure of regulation. And yet you said something in July that caught my attention about a moratorium on regulations. You said, I think having a moratorium on new federal regulations is a great idea. It sends a wonderful signal to the private sector that they're going to have some breathing room. Do you think that's what the private sector needs now, is breathing room?
I do think the private sector needs some breathing room. When you look at all of the uncertainty that's being created by the Democrats' agenda, they've got every employer in America, every investor in America scared to death, and they're frozen. When you look at what happened in Wall Street, when you look at what happened in the Gulf, it wasn't that we didn't have enough regulations. What we didn't have was enough enforcement by the federal bureaucrats in charge of pursuing these things. The SEC could have done a lot more with regard to the financial meltdown, except they didn't. It's pretty clear that those bureaucrats charged with inspecting these wells didn't do their job. So it's not more regulations. How about we enforce the ones we have now?
Let me talk about, on the subject of regulations and the broader economy, the job numbers that came out Friday were disappointing. The private sector job growth is anemic at best, and yet the president says he is not fearful of a so-called double-dip recession. What do you say?
Well, I'm concerned about the state of the economy. It's pretty clear that over the last 3 months, the economy has paused. And it's also pretty clear the American people are still demanding and asking the question, where are the jobs? And the reason we don't have new jobs is because of the job-killing agenda pursued by President Obama and his allies in the Congress. They really do have employers scared to death. I've been all over my district over the last several days. I was in a couple of my neighboring states. I talked to a lot of employers who just are fearful of what's coming next out of Washington. It's all the spending, it's all the debt. It's their national energy tax. They want to call it cap and trade. More mandates, higher costs, more taxes. Their health care bill. More mandates, higher costs, higher taxes. And if all that isn't bad enough, they want to raise the taxes on the American people. Well, it's no wonder that employers are frozen.
Let's talk about it. It's interesting. You talk the debt, the importance of covering government spending, and you worry about the Democrats raising taxes. The Obama administration wants to extend the Bush tax cuts only for those who make less than $250,000, and he wants to let them expire for those wealthy Americans making more than that. You're opposed to that. You want to extend the tax cuts, and the Republican leadership does. But Alan Greenspan, who was on this program last week, chairman of the Federal Reserve, said that's the wrong idea. Here's what he said.
Look, I'm very much in favor of tax money. And the problem that we've gotten into in recent years is spending programs with borrowed money, tax cuts with borrowed money, and at the end of the day, that proves disastrous. And my view is I don't think we can play subtle policy here.
You don't agree with Republican leaders who say tax cuts pay for themselves?
They do not.
Leader Boehner, he puts it right to you.
The only way we're going to get our economy going again and solve our budget problems is to get the economy moving, get more people back to work where they can care for their own families, and begin to expand the tax rules to bring more revenue to the federal government. And what we have to do is we have to get our arms around the spending spree that's going on in Washington, D.C.
But Leader Boehner, I'm sorry, you're not being
problem.
responsive to a specific point, which is how can you be for cutting the deficit and also cutting taxes as well when they're not paid for?
Listen, you can't raise taxes in the middle of a weak economy without risking a double dip in this recession. President Obama's favorite Republican economist, Mark Zandi, came out several weeks ago and made it clear that raising taxes at this point in the economy is a very bad idea.
But do you agree that tax cuts cannot be paid for? But tax cuts are not paid for. Is that correct?
I am not for raising taxes on the American people in a soft economy.
That's not the question,
and
Leader Boehner.
the president wants to tax.
Are tax cuts paid for or not?
Listen, what you're trying to do is get into this Washington game, and they're funny accounting over there. You cannot get the economy going again by raising taxes on those people who we expect to create jobs in America and to get the economy going again. If we want to solve the budget problem, we've got to have a healthy economy, and we have to get our arms around the runaway spending that's going on in Washington, D.C.
I just want to clarify this. I mean, I'm relying on what Chairman Greenspan said. Maybe if you're accusing him of funny Washington games, he says that tax cuts that aren't paid for are not cutting the deficit. That they are not actually paid for. It's borrowed money. And so, do you believe tax cuts pay for themselves or not?
I do believe that we've got to get more money in the hands of small businesses and American families to get our economy going again. And the only way to get that economy going again is to do that and to get our arms around the spending.
All right. One of the ways you talk about getting your arms around the spending was something that you suggested back in June, and that is that Social Security, the retirement age ought to be raised to the age of 70. Is that something that the GOP will campaign on in the fall?
Well, David, I think it's time for the American people to have an adult conversation about the problems that we face. These entitlement programs serve tens of millions of Americans, and they're critically important. But we also know that these programs are unsustainable in their current form. And I really do think it's time that we sit down and we talk to the American people together, we solve them. And I think we need to bring Democrats and Republicans together in order to solve this problem.
And so you favor raising the retirement age?
David, there are a lot of options about how you solve these. But I don't want to get the cart before the horse. I think it's important to have this conversation. It's going to be a difficult conversation, but it's time to have it, and it's time to come up with some solutions that are done in a bipartisan way to help address these problems.
Let me talk about the midterm race. Several months ago, back in March, you thought it would be a steep climb for Republicans to retake the House. What do you say today?
I believe that it is a challenge for us to take back the House. But we've got candidates, more candidates than we've ever had. We have 430 districts with one or more Republican candidates in the race. We have the better candidates than we ever have. But we want to earn back the majority in order to renew our effort to go after a smaller, less costly, and more accountable federal government in Washington, D.C.
But you still think it's a challenge. It was interesting, the President's press secretary, Robert Gibbs, as you know, said on this program that he thought there was possible that Republicans could take over the House. He now believes that's not the case. That caused quite a stir. What impact do you think that had, and yet it hasn't changed your view about the challenges that Republicans face?
Well, David, listen, it's only August. There are a lot of things that can happen between now and Election Day. Is it possible? Yes, it certainly is possible. There are 100 seats in play around the country, and 94 of them are held by Democrat members. I've been all over my district. I've been through a lot of other districts. The American people are screaming at the top of their lungs to Washington, stop the spending, stop the job-killing policies, and yet Democrats in Washington refuse to listen to the American people. Republicans have been listening all summer with our program, America Speaking Out.
Well,
we're listening. We're going to come forward with our agenda right after Labor Day.
Right after Labor Day. Why wait until then? Why not do it now?
I think it's important that we listen to the American people. It's not about what I think. It's about what the American people think. And at AmericaSpeakingOut.com, hundreds of thousands of people have given us ideas about what Washington should be doing. People have voted on other people's ideas. And if people want to go to AmericaSpeakingOut.com, they can participate in this. And out of this listening, we will have a governing agenda to get this country on track.
Leader Boehner, you are certainly campaigning to be the next speaker. As a matter of fact, you can go on BoehnerForSpeaker.org and order a mug, among other items, to support that effort. And yes, the President of the United States is going to fundraisers around the country and slamming Republicans. This is one of the things that he says.
They have not come up with a single solitary new idea to address the challenges of the American people. They don't have a single idea that's different from George Bush's ideas. Not one.
What do you say to that?
When I handed Nancy Pelosi the gavel 18 months ago, I said that if Republicans had to oppose our Democrat colleagues or our new president, it was our obligation to tell the American people how we would do it differently. Every time we've opposed our Democrat colleagues, we've offered what we thought was a better solution, each and every time. And when we roll out our agenda, we're going to roll out our solutions to solve the problem of the joblessness in America, to get Americans back to, and how we would control spending.
Will you offer specific spending cuts to offset the money that's lost by extending tax cut?
Listen, we've offered all kinds of spending cuts. As a matter of fact, Paul Ryan and Jeb Hensarling, two leaders on our budget committee, have offered $1.3 trillion worth of spending cuts. We've offered these to the president, asked the president to send rescissions to the Congress, and we offered to work with him to enact those rescissions. Why don't we stop the stimulus spending? There's still about $400 or $500 billion of the stimulus plan that has not been spent. Why don't we stop it? It's not working. Secondly, why don't we make sure that we get all the TARP funds back and use it to pay down the deficit? Why don't we put a cap on discretionary spending at much lower levels than what we have today? It's time to stop the spending. The
president, of course, has called for a cap of discretionary spending.
I'm talking about a real cap, like at 2008 levels, not at 2010 levels.
All right, let me ask you about a couple of other topics, including the ethics scandal surrounding Congressman Charlie Rangel. There's news out this morning that there was a deal that was being discussed and that it was Republicans who stood in the way. They wanted a trial. Is that accurate?
I would have no idea. Under the rules of the House, the Ethics Committee proceedings are private. This is the only committee in the Congress where you have 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats. And from what I read in the press, the charges against Mr. Rangel were brought by 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats together. But this isn't about Charlie Rangel. This is about Nancy Pelosi's biggest failure. She said that it was time to drain the swamp. Not once during this entire 2-year proceeding has she called for Chairman Rangel to step down from his post as the ranking Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee.
Is that what you're doing this morning?
And really, he already stepped down, but he did it on his own, and frankly, it was much too late.
Should he step down from Congress, from his seat?
I think that's for Charlie to decide. But I do think it's time to hold members of Congress accountable. The American people deserve to have members of Congress of the highest of ethical standards, and it has not happened. I told my colleagues 18 months ago when I became their leader that I was going to hold members accountable, And I have.
Leader Boehner, one final question that's been kind of a hot button issue this week, and that is calls by some Republicans to amend the Constitution to change the 14th Amendment, which provides birthright citizenship if you're born in this country. As a matter of fact, on the RNC's website, the 14th Amendment is listed as an accomplishment of the Republicans of its legacy over time. Do you support efforts to have the 14th Amendment amended at this point?
Well, David, I'm not the expert on this issue, but I have read these comments here over this past week. But I think that there is a problem. To provide an incentive for illegal immigrants to come here so that their children can be U.S. citizens does, in fact, draw people to our country. I do think that it's time for us to secure our borders and enforce the law and allow this conversation about the 14th Amendment to continue.
But do you have a position on it?
Listen, I think it's worth considering, but it's a serious problem that affects our country, and in certain parts of our country, clearly our schools, our hospitals are being overrun by illegal immigrants, a lot of whom came here just so their children could become U.S. citizens.
All right, Leader Boehner.
They should do it. They should do it the legal way.
All right, Leader Boehner, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your views.
Thank you.